Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt. We now turn to the very first of the poems from Inscriptions, the first of the 24, Oneself I Sing. Now the assumption, of course, is that you've been following our work on LearnStrong.net. I would hope that you've even paid attention to the previous lecture where I introduced Inscriptions. We're always reminding ourselves in 303 that we are the stories that we tell and retell. Whitman in many ways invented the idea that as well were the stories that we learn to accept or decide to reject. Our assumptions as well is that you're familiar with our learning theory, our desire to connect new to old, and we sometimes said that the new N-E-W is the new K-N-E-W. We also assume you're familiar with our annotative approach. At level 1, we'll be summarizing. At level 2A, we'll be talking themes, messages. At level 2B, the rhetorical level, literary techniques, not what Whitman says, but how he says it. At 3A, we'll be hoping to relate to other texts, of course, within the Inscriptions section itself. And then finally, and most importantly, because of our learning theory, our goal is always to relate to ourselves. For those of you that are following these lectures in every single poem you want to read, you want to annotate, and I'm exhorting you to do that. Get yourself a deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. Mark it up, enjoy it. Whitman used to love this thing where he would tear out pages from a book, carry them in his pocket. Of course, today we have a smartphone that allows us to do that, but I still think just that ability to hold on to Leaves of Grass and mark it and enjoy it, I recommend you do it. Finally, the assumptions of what we call our Big Five, where we ask, what does the text that we're about to look at say about epistemology, what you can know, and especially what we will refer to as the fallibus position, that difference between an absolutist position, I'm right epistemologically, I know, you don't know, I'm right, you're wrong, or the relativist position, there is no truth, there are no absolutes, which obviously posits a truth or an absolute, the performative contradiction. Somewhere in the middle between those two is what we call the fallibilist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. That is the original understanding of the Enlightenment view of science, and it's certainly going to be Whitman's view as well. He will constantly be talking about guessing and the like, and we'll play that game. Ontology, who am I, who are you, and of course, the study of being, and of course then psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the group mind, and the tension, put that in your notes, between the two. We're going to see that already in this poem that we'll be studying together. And then finally, the theodicy question, the question of evil, pain, suffering in the world. That is to say, to learn how to ask not, why did this happen to me, but rather, why did this happen for me? Finally, we'll be looking at what we've called the 5 Ps, or perspectives on Whitman. We'll talk about Whitman as person, as Whitman as poet, Whitman as pedagogue, Whitman as politician in his love of democracy, and finally, Whitman as philosopher. That is to say, everything from the pre-Socratics through Emerson, that tremendous influence on his life. Now, the background information here right away that makes this poem a fascinating one. The first one, Oneself I Sing, the title. This poem is really a shorter rendering of the inscription italicized on the front piece of Leaves of Grass, 1867. It's going to be reprinted in the Sands of 70 group, and then under the title, Small, the Theme of My Chant. And then the present version was very firstly printed in 1871. Now, both versions were derived from drafts in, scholars say, 7 small notebooks which Walt Whitman had fastened into his own copy of the first edition of Leaves of Grass and were edited later by Clifton Joseph Furness in 1929. All right? So there's a remarkable history for this set of lines, and we're going to enjoy kind of studying as we look at it. So let's go to work now with the poems. 9 lines, very simple, and yet so powerful. He says, one's self I sing, a simple, separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse, of physiology from top to toe I sing, not physiognomy alone, nor brain alone is worthy for the muse. I say, the form complete is worthier far, the female equally with the male I sing, of life immense, impassioned pulse and power, cheerful for freest action formed under the laws divine, the modern man I sing. Now, I'm going to say this in so many of these lectures, you guys, but I'm going to fight the tendency to say too much here, because I think you can begin to say too much. And as we said in earlier lectures, these are not lectures for the scholars. The scholars have their own set of lectures. We're interested in getting to the poem's heart as quickly as we can and taking away from it something of 3B that we can hold on to. Let's exegete now really quickly. Notice, we begin with the idea of self. Ontologically, one's self, right? That is to say, one's innermost being. We start out. Notice we're back to singing over and over again. We're going to have song and chanting and chorus as being a huge part of what's going on. And obviously tying it, as we said in earlier lectures, tying it to the whole notion of the Homeric bard and the singing. Notice he starts out by saying that he's simple. Now this is of course a joke of an adjective, because there's nothing simple about Whitman, and yet so simple, so direct, so obvious. We think of Wordsworth and the way he talks about his attempt at language in his preface to Lyrical Ballads. We've talked about that elsewhere at learnstrong.net. Notice, a separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse. Now, Whitman loved this word en masse. He used it, he borrowed it. He'll use it as well in Song of Myself, line 478, so we're going to have more to say about it later. But it's a tension, we would say this for your notes, between, on the one hand, and Whitman was forever challenged to balance the two. On the one hand, the individual. On the other hand, the group. And how specifically we're going to play that game. At 3A, obviously, some of you smiling already because you're writing down, right, John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, the classic text that has a lot to do with that tension. But of course, if you'll think about it, it takes us all the way back to the Iliad. Achilles, he is an individual, he has been insulted, he is sitting in his tent, and yet he's not alone. He's got his pal Patroclus there, and there's that tension. You're going to let a whole bunch of us die, Odysseus asks by Iliad 9, and you're not going to step in? So you've got that notion of, I'm an individual and I'm my own person, but at the same time, I belong to the group. How can we be both at the same time? Whitman was convinced one of the only ways to get there was through poetry, which is of itself kind of interesting. Now, physiology, of course, is this notion from biology of the functions, the process, we would say, maybe of organisms we would call living, from top to toe. Now, this idea of top to toe is central. We're going to come back to it again and again. Whitman is a lover of the body, of all of the body, from top to toe. In other words, from the beginning to the end, from the alpha to the omega. And yet, he's going to continue after he says, I sing, not physiogeny, that is to say, only outward appearance, that is to say, the physical body alone, nor brain alone is worthy for the muse. And notice the word muse here is capitalized. No question, put it in your nose. This is obviously another invocation of the muse, not unlike the epigraph that we just finished with a while ago. I say the form complete. Now, of course, the word form used again and again. What's amazing? We ask this question about Shakespeare, we ask it about Whitman. Where does Whitman come from? He has an elementary education, and then that's it. And the rest of it, he's self-taught, or he enjoys meeting with people who educate him. He goes to, for example, the speeches and the readings of a guy like Emerson. And yet, in all of this, we're amazed at the way he will reference. For example, the word form immediately makes us write down Plato's Republic. You can go back and take a look at our form theory lectures, of course. Hypercritical in our understanding of leaves of grass, that notion of the two-box theory, we might say. The form complete is worthier far, in mass bringing together both the body as well as the spirit, soul, mind, consciousness. The female, and let's get to Whitman the iconoclast, no question. If we talk about Whitman the person, we've got to talk about Whitman the iconoclast. That is to say, he's going to say some things that are going to frustrate some people as he is publishing these poems. The female equally with the male I sing. And notice that both female and male are capitalized because they're going to serve as almost subsets of the human. And that is to say, we're all in this thing together. Now, this bringing together, this pushing together, this integral kind of idea is central to how we will read so many of Whitman's poems. So we want to pay attention to it. Of life, notice it's capitalized. Immense, impassioned, pulse, and power. Now, let's just start with the word life. For Whitman, as we talk about our two boxes, right, and of course we reference Ruthie's tree right out there. That is to say, in the first box, whatever related to the five senses, you can see, taste, touch, we won't get into it, the tree. But what makes that tree so special in that second box, and not the physical, but the metaphysical, is, of course, the energy of the tree, the life of the tree. That's nature with a capital N. Of course, when we say energy, we have to talk about that which can be neither created nor destroyed. And the minute we start playing that game, we'll say, oh, so it doesn't exist. No, it definitely exists. Dude, you just said it can't be created or destroyed. How is it possible it exists then if it can't be created or destroyed? Well, there's the mystery. That is for Whitman life. Immense, he loves this word. That is to say inclusive, prodigious, beyond language. We will sometimes call it translinguistic. And then notice his trinities. He loves his St. Augustine, his trinities. Notice the repetition at 2b here. The repetition of the P words. Passion, we're going to see a lot of it. Pulse, we're going to hear a lot about it. Power, no question. This notion of the power of leaves of grass. And then the next word, cheerful. Now what's amazing, if you pick up any good biography, Jerome Loving's, the Kaplan, Dave Reynolds, any of the great biographies of Whitman, you will come face to face with tremendous pain. We're back to the theodicy question. And yet, so much of his poem, optimistic, cheerful. We said it earlier as we were talking about the first poem in the epigraph. Cheerful, for freest action formed under the laws divine. Say two quick observations here. Whitman is a great lover of freedom. He will say in passage 46, 47, I know I have the best of time and space. It was never measured and never will be measured. It comes right here at the very beginning. I am free, afoot and light-hearted. I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me. This idea of you're as free as you allow yourself to be. I would write that line down and then see how it works with Whitman. That is to say, we're always looking for the greatest amount of freedom because that's the greatest amount of joy. But it is freedom formed under the laws divine. Now, what laws in heaven's name could he be talking about? Well, of course, he knew that Jefferson had said the laws of nature and nature's God. Right? That is to say, the idea that there's a certain kind of divinity that holds everything together. We're going to get into this. Of course, his background as a Quaker is going to become a part of this important part of the theological iconoclasm of Whitman. Finally, he finishes, line 9. The modern, notice it's capitalized. We think immediately of his poem Passage to India. We think, of course, of Mary Shelley's modern Prometheus, Frankenstein. Man, I sing. Now, the word man here is an inclusive word for Whitman because he's already told us male and female. So when he uses the word man, one of the monumental mistakes of reading Leaves of Grass is when he uses the word man that you think of man as in male. No. By man here he means human. And this is going to be an interesting question for us with Whitman. Are we born human or we decide to become human through a conscious choice? That's going to be that tension ontologically that he's always playing games with. And then back, of course, to the last word, sing. So notice he begins in the first line with I sing. He ends with the last line with I sing. This is going to be a collection of poems and Leaves of Grass for the deathbed edition, because this is where this poem is set, that will remind us right from the start, it's all about our singing. And of course, as we have said many times, it's all about our swinging, because we only get to swing at the park for a little time. The van is always waiting. We don't want to go to the van, but we have to go to the van, as we have pointed out so many times. At 2a, well, this is, of course, the poem regarding the modern man or person or human. And, of course, the tension between the self, psychologically, and a democracy, sociology, and how you reconcile those. And the answer for him is, we sing. We sing. If there's anything, I think, that can promote unity, harmony in today's complex, really complex problems, it is maybe that we learn how to sing once again, together, right? Which is why we all love concerts, when we all can be together. No one cares about anything that might divide us because the music is everything, right? At 2b, in terms of possible understandings of the rhetoric here, again in Moss, that harmony, it will become a powerful symbol. Write that down. We're going to come back to that symbolism over and over again. As well, of course, his tripartites, his repetitions of those P words, passion, pulse, power. At 3a, well, we've mentioned already Republic and Whitman as pedagogue and as philosopher. We will get to it a lot. We've mentioned Shelley's Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. Think about that. We are talking Prometheus, the modern Prometheus, Shelley's Frankenstein, published in 1818. We've given full lectures on that elsewhere at learnstrong.net. But just think about the power of the juxtaposition that Leaves of Grass and Shelley's Frankenstein will live within a very close proximity to each other from 1818 to 1855 for the original Leaves of Grass. We have to mention, of course, Emerson's essays here, The Oversoul as well as Nature, and we've given full lectures on almost all of the Emerson lectures, essays. And it is my hope that if you're following these lectures, that you've paid attention to some of the things we've had to say about Emerson, because I mean, to pick up Oversoul and to look at it, we see so many of the cadences that will be played out, not just in this poem, but many to come as we get into the Leaves of Grass. Finally, at 3b, question, how do you balance your understanding of the individual, leave me alone, it's my life, versus the dynamic pressure that is always placed on us by the group of somebodies that we'll call, for lack of a better term, society. This is, of course, the question of John Stuart Mill's on liberty, and it continues to haunt, is that the right verb? Haunt us, I mean challenge us. How do we build those two together? Do you think it's something as simple as learning how to sing together? The symphonic, we think immediately of something like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to kind of give us a working model of it. Finally, do you think that America is primarily a harmony of the individual and the group? Or are you more inclined to say that somehow that image or that dream, that Whitman-esque dream, is no longer possible? Where do you come down on that? Again, these 3B questions are inclined to help you to own the text yourself. Well, there's the introduction to the first of the inscription poems, Oneself I Sing. We'll get on now to the classic As I Pondered in Silence, and I'll be excited to hear what you think about that one. Thank you. Keep talking with Walt.